Hi, I'm Rob Zwick, and I'm wearing my dog ears, and I'm going to read a book called Library Lion. It's written brilliantly by Michelle Knudsen and illustrated beautifully by Kevin Hawkes. Library Lion. When you open the book, sure enough, there's a picture of the lion walking down the street, and there's a weather vane that has a lion on it up there. The drawings in this book are magnificent. One day, a lion came to the library. He walked right past the circulation desk and up into the stacks. Mr. McBee ran down the hall to the head librarian's office. "Miss Merriweather," he called. "No running," said Miss Merriweather without looking up. She's so cool. "But there's a lion in the library," said Mr. McBee. "Is he breaking any rules?" asked Miss Merriweather. She was very particular about breaking rules. "Well, no," said Mr. McBee, "not really." "Then leave him be." And here they are, McBee and Merriweather. The lion wandered all around the library. He sniffed the card catalog. He rubbed his head against the new book collection. He probably loved that new book collection. Then he padded over to the story center and went to sleep. No one was sure what to do. There weren't any rules about lions in the library. Soon it was time for story hour. There weren't any rules about lions at story hour either. The story lady seemed a little nervous, but she read out the first book's title in a good, clear voice. The lion looked up. The lady kept reading. The lion stayed for the next story and the story after that. He waited for another story, but the children began to walk away. "Story hour is over," a little girl told him. "It's time to go." The lion looked at the children, he looked at the story lady, he looked at the closed books, and then he roared very loud. Roar! Everybody's kind of surprised at that. Miss Merriweather came striding out of her office. "Who is making that noise?" she demanded. "It's the lion," said Mr. McBee. Miss Merriweather marched over to the lion and said, "If you cannot be quiet, you will have to leave," she said in a stern voice. "Those are the rules." The lion kept roaring. He sounded sad. The little girl tugged at Miss Merriweather's dress. "If he promises to be quiet, can he come back for story hour tomorrow?" she asked. The lion stopped roaring. He looked at Miss Merriweather. Miss Merriweather looked back. Then she said, "Yes, a nice, quiet lion would certainly be welcome at story hour tomorrow." "Hooray!" said the children. And there's Miss Merriweather just letting the lion know. Who's making that noise? The next day, the lion came back. "You are early," said Miss Merriweather. "Story is not until 3 o'clock. The lion did not budge. "Very well," said Miss Merriweather. "You might as well make yourself useful." She sent him to dust off the encyclopedias until it was time for story hour. The next day, the lion came early again. Miss Merriweather had him lick the stamps for the overdue notices. Soon, the lion began doing things without being asked. He dusted the encyclopedias, he licked the envelopes, he let small children stand on his back to reach books on the highest shelves. Then he curled up in the story corner to wait for story hour to begin. At first, people in the library were nervous about the lion, but soon they got used to having him around. In fact, he seemed very well suited for the library. His big feet were quiet on the library floor. He made a comfy backrest for the children at story hour, and he never roared in the library anymore. "What a helpful lion," people said. They patted his soft head as he walked by. "How did we ever get along without him?" Mr. McBee scowled when he heard that. They'd always gotten along just fine before. There were no lions. Lions don't understand the rules. They do not belong in the library. One day, after he had dusted all the encyclopedias and licked all the envelopes and helped all the small children, the lion padded down the hall to Miss Merriweather's office to see what else there was to do. There was still some time before story hour. "Hello, lion," said Miss Merriweather. "I know something you can do. You can bring a book back into the stacks for me. Let me just get it down from the shelf." Miss Merriweather stepped onto the step stool. The book was just out of reach. She stood on her toes. She stretched out her fingers. Almost there, she said. Miss Merriweather stretched a little bit too far. Ouch, said Miss Merriweather softly. She did not get up. Mr. McBee, she called after a minute. Mr. McBee. But Mr. McBee was at the circulation desk, and he could not hear her calling. And look at this, the lion looking at Miss Merriweather. Lion, said Miss Merriweather, please go and get Mr. McBee. The lion ran down the hall. No running, Miss Merriweather called after him. The lion put his big front paws up on the circulation desk and looked at Mr. McBee. Go away, lion, Mr. McBee said. I am busy. The lion whined. He pointed his nose down the hall toward Miss Merriweather's office. Mr. McBee ignored him. Finally, the lion did the only thing he could think of to do. He looked Mr. McBee right in the eye, and he opened his mouth, and he roared the loudest roar he had ever roared. Mr. McBee gasped. You're not being quiet, he said to the lion. You are breaking the rules. Mr. McBee walked down the hall as fast as he could. The lion did not follow him. He had broken the rules. He knew what that meant. He hung his head and walked towards the doors. Mr. McBee did not notice. Miss Merriweather, he called as he walked. Miss Merriweather, the lion has broken the rules. The lion has broken the rules. So here's the lion heading through the door, and there's Mr. McBee walking down the hall. He burst into Miss Merriweather's office. She was not in her chair. Miss Merriweather? He asked. Sometimes, said Miss Merriweather from the floor behind her desk, there is a good reason to break the rules, even in the library. Now please go call a doctor. I think I've broken my arm. Mr. McBee ran to call the doctor. No running, Mr. McBee, Miss Merriweather called after him. And there he found her lying on the floor with a broken arm. The next day, things were back to normal, almost. Miss Merriweather's left arm was in a cast. The doctor had told her not to work too hard. I will have my lion to help me, Miss Merriweather thought, but the lion did not come to the library that morning. At 3 o'clock, Miss Merriweather went over to the story corner. The story lady was just beginning, and the lion was not there either. You hear the kids at the story corner? People in the library kept looking up from their books and computer screens, hoping they would see a familiar, furry face. But the lion did not come in that day. The lion did not come in the next day either, or the day after that. David looks sort of lost. Where's the lion? One evening, Mr. McBee stopped by Miss Merriweather's office on his way out. Can I do anything for you before I go? He asked her. No, thank you, said Miss Merriweather. She was looking out the window. Her voice was very quiet, even for the library. Mr. McBee frowned as he walked away. He thought there was probably something he could do for Miss Merriweather after all. Mr. McBee left the library, but he did not go home. It's raining out. He did not go home. He walked around the neighborhood. He looked under cars. He looked behind bushes. He looked in backyards and trash cans and tree houses. Finally, he circled back towards the library. The lion was sitting outside, looking through the glass. Hello, lion, said Mr. McBee. The lion did not turn around. I thought you might like to know, said Mr. McBee, that there's a new rule in the library. No roaring allowed unless you have a very good reason. Say, if you're trying to help a friend who's been hurt, for example. The lion's ears twitched. He turned around, but Mr. McBee was already walking away. The next day, Mr. McBee walked down the hall to Miss Merriweather's office. What is it, Mr. McBee? Asked Miss Merriweather in her new, sad, quiet voice. I thought you might like to know, said Mr. McBee, that there's a lion in the library. Miss Merriweather jumped down from her chair and ran down the hall. Mr. McBee smiled. No running, he called after her. Miss Merriweather didn't listen. Sometimes there was a good reason to break the rules, even in the library. And there she's giving There's Mrs. Merriweather giving him a big hug. The end.